A boy who turned up in Berlin claiming to have spent the last 5 years in a forest may be allowed to move in with foster parents. The boy, who calls himself Ray, speaks in English with only a few words of German, but there are doubts over whether he is actually English. Channel 4 News has spoken to the woman who looked after the boy after his arrival in Berlin. Katie Razzall reports.
Still a mystery 3 weeks on. Who is this teenager who says he's been living in the forest for 5 years? A boy who speaks English and little German, who claims he buried his father in the woods and came to Berlin. A compass led him to the capital, he says. His father had told him if anything ever happened, head north. Ray, as he's known, says he did just that when his dad died. Where and why, unclear. But on September the 5th, he turned up at Berlin City Hall with a rucksack and told staff he was all alone in the world. Understandably, the authorities want to shield the 17-year-old as they try to piece together his story. But Channel 4 News has spoken to the woman supervising Ray's case.
We have to protect him. That's our duty. I can go as far as saying he's doing well and we're keen that it stays that way.
Ray's reportedly told the authorities that his father took him to live in the forest after his mother died in a car accident. They wandered about, slept in huts. If true, where could they have been? Some have suggested the Czech border, the forests above Schlettau in Germany's Ore Mountains. If he'd headed north from here, he'd have hit Berlin 200 miles later. Not without going through plenty of urban areas beforehand, though. And of course, there are other options, in a country a fifth of which is still covered in forest.
All I can say is that for us it's a very unusual case. Up until now I've never had to deal with a case like this. But on the other hand, in principle, it's a normal procedure. We go to court about custody and bit by bit we get everything sorted for the boy. And that includes his identity and also how his life will continue from here, his education, job and so on.
This court will likely decide this week to assign the teenager legal guardians. His story far-fetched and fascinating for it, harking back as it does to other mysterious tales. Like Peter the Wild Boy, a Georgian celebrity, this feral teenager was found living naked in woods near Hanover. George I had him brought to England, his face still on the Kensington Palace staircase. The plan to educate the languageless Peter, to show perhaps the civilising of a noble savage. Peter never learnt to talk. It's now believed he had a rare genetic disorder, but he lived a long life. Of course, Ray's a very different prospect. He was able to use the Berlin Underground as directed from City Hall. He's said to be adept with a knife and fork. So what explanation could there be for his plight?
It might be a traumatic event, it might be a traumatic cause for this amnesia. But it's very unusual that it's really that particular things are still aware for him. And so this is really tricky to figure it out.
While Ray's psychological counselling continues here, it's the fact he's said to speak English that has us hooked. But Channel 4 News understands the Germans have not been in contact with the Foreign Office and that there's nothing to suggest he's a British national.